For today's video, I'm going to be talking about plants for 40 US gallon or 160 litre tanks by going over every single plant that I currently have in my own 40 gallon tank. Just for people over in the United States, due to the gallon to litre conversion, this tank's dimensions doesn't match up to a standard 40 US breeder or tall over in the United States. Over here we have our own dimensions. The tank runs on a Hygger 957 as its primary light, but it does have a Nicrew C10 as a backup just in the foreground to illuminate that area. Both lights are set to maximum intensity for 6 hours each day, so I would consider this to be a moderate light intensity setup for low-tech tanks. This tank doesn't run a CO2 system, and while I did use liquid fertilizers on it for the first year, for the past 6 months or so now, it's been running on the fish poop fertilization system. That's a natural fertilization system relying on the waste from my fish, shrimp and snails in the tank to fertilize the plants. It works very well for low-tech tanks, and I link to one of my articles on it in the description. First up is the Echinodorus Cordifolius Fluitans, and this did have a trim a few days ago, so it looks a little rough, but within a couple of weeks it'll be perfectly fine. This is one of the original plants that I had in this setup, and it's been very easy to keep, making it a great beginner-friendly option. Before the trim, it did fill out this entire area, so it does deliver lush, thick growth if just left to do its thing. Plant nursery listings for this plant's maximum height are vague, but I've personally had it reach up to 50 centimeters or around 20 inches long. Because of its height, it's definitely going to be a background plant for a 40 gallon tank, and if you let it grow with minimal trimming, it can easily serve as a centerpiece plant to catch the eye. I have the standard form with the green colour, but there is a variegated form called Echinodorus Cordifolius Marble Queen if you prefer that look. Next up are Anubias Coinleaf and Anubias Nanocoin, which I do think are pretty interchangeable. It's mainly the shape of the leaves that change. In this tank I have 2 of each grown together on what I call my Anubias Island, and I just left them to grow without any trimming for 18 months, and this is what they've turned into with a lush, thick coverage in the centre. I know there's algae on their leaves, but this tank did have a partial rescape over the last 3 months or so it is still settling, but it is getting a lot better. I really love the look of these Anubias Islands, and I've seen a lot of other people do them as well, but keep in mind Anubias has a very slow growth rate, so it will take a while for it to fill in and get to anything close to this. The Coinleaf variety has the rounder leaves, while the Nano variety has the typical oval Anubias leaves that most people are more familiar with. One of my favourite things about this Anubias Island is that its thick coverage offers so many hiding spots, and I often see different species of fish hiding amongst it at the same time. And on top of that, because both of these are from the Anubias Barteri species, they are both very hardy and very easy to care for, making them excellent beginner plants. I keep both varieties in several of my tanks, and they usually max out at around 15 centimeters, which is around 6 inches. Just remember that these are epiphyte plants, which means they are attached to rocks or driftwood in your tank using glue or thread rather than planting them in the substrate. Next up is Java Fern, and while this is often listed as an easy category plant, the more aquariums I personally try and keep it in, the more I realise it's definitely a medium category plant in low-tech setups like I keep. I do have a full plant profile for this plant and several others featured in the video that I link to in the description that goes into a lot more detail on why I personally think Java Fern is a medium category plant. Now there are several theories out there, but in my experience the main challenges with Java Fern is its potential oversensitivity to potassium deficiencies, which are fairly common in low-tech planted tanks, as well as a potential issue with flow. Despite this, it's still one of the most popular plants in the hobby, and you can find this in almost any shop that sells aquatic plants. Just like Anubias that I covered earlier, this is also an epiphyte plant, so it's attached to rocks and hardscape in your tank rather than planted in the substrate. When it's healthy, Java Fern looks absolutely amazing. It really does. It delivers some beautiful thick growth, and the leaves can get up to 30 centimeters or 12 inches in size. But I have recently trimmed mine back, and it does look a little rough, but it will grow back in over the coming months. I honestly do think this plant is oversensitive to potassium deficiencies, and I have managed to fix it by feeding the shrimp in this tank high potassium foods such as blanched spinach, oak leaves, mulberry leaves, dandelion leaves is another good one. The shrimp absolutely love them, and they are higher in potassium. The theory is that the shrimp eat these and then their waste contains more potassium, so when the waste-eating bacteria breaks that down, the water-soluble parts go into the water column and the Java fern can get nutrients in from it. About 3 months ago now, I did stop adding a lot of these foods to this tank just to see what happens, and the holes did start to form in the Java fern's leaves again. If you don't like shrimp or you're keeping fish that are just going to eat them or something like that, you can just use a potassium liquid fertilizer to get more potassium into the tank if you do want to keep this plant. On top of that, I have seen a lot of people say that the rhizome does need consistent water flow to it to keep the plant healthy, and that's the main reason I did some trimming on it recently just to test what will happen. Next up is Echinodorus Aquartica, and this one does look rough right now, not because I've recently trimmed it, just because of the algae growth, but like I said, things are slowly getting better. This sword plant does stay relatively small, usually maxing out at around 20 centimeters or 8 inches in height. Some plant nurseries do list this as a medium difficulty category plant, but in my experience it is very easy to keep and it'll work well under any modern LED lighting system for aquariums. Its lighter green colour compared to the other popular sword plants in the hobby can make this stand out, as well as make red plants which are next to it pop even more. Because of its size, it's an excellent option as a mid-ground plant in a 40-gallon tank, but depending on the specific scape you're using, you can also use it in the background or foreground depending on your needs. Here in Europe, this plant is very easy to find and it is rolling out in other areas because to my knowledge, Tropica is the only plant nursery that currently farm this in a large scale. Next up is Anubias Glabra, which is another epiphyte plant, meaning it's mounted onto hardscape rather than planted in the substrate. Now this one is a little difficult to see in this specific scape because it is towards the back of my right hand hardscape island behind my Java fern. Unlike most Anubias varieties, Anubias Glabra has long, thin leaves which adds a unique texture to the tank. Although Anubias Glabra and Anubias angustifolia are actually different varieties of the Anubias Barteri species, they are commonly missold as each other, but this isn't really a major issue like it can be with some other plants because they are very similar in both their appearance and care requirements. Just like every other variety of Anubias that I personally keep, Anubias Glabra is a variety of the Anubias Barteri species, which is one of the better ones for aquarium use because it converts from out of water to submerged life very well, making it beginner friendly. I've kept this in a few different tanks now and it does tend to max out at around 20 centimeters or 8 inches tall, but then the rhizome seems to grow more horizontally, so it will offer coverage that way. Next up is Echinodorus Bleheri, which is commonly known as Amazon sword, and it's one of the most popular plants for a 40-gallon tank by far. Again, it is a little difficult to see this plant in this tank as well because it's in the background behind my Anubias island and Java fern island. It's also only been in the tank a couple of months, so it is still adjusting its leaves to its submerged form and growing newer leaves in. But this is easily one of the most popular plants in the hobby by far, especially over in the United States where they tend to have larger aquariums rather than here in Europe where we usually stick with smaller tanks. I've seen people use this in several different ways, from what I'm doing where it's part of an overall planted tank to keeping it as a solitary plant in the tank because this thing gets massive if you just leave it to grow and you can pretty much use it in any way you can think of. My friend has one of these which is quite established in his 300 litre tank, which is around 80 US gallons now, and it's well over 50 centimeters or 20 inches tall, and it does seem to grow at a decent spot to a decent length and then it does slow down after that, but his hasn't stopped growing yet. Because of its huge size potential, depending on what you're using it for, in a 40-gallon tank you may have to trim it, but it's not really a fast grower like stem plants or anything like that, so you might be trimming it once every 3 to 4 months. Next up is Limnophila sessiliflora, which is one of my favourite plants in the hobby by far. This wasn't actually intended for this tank, I planted it in here to try and help get the algae issues in the tank under control after the recent rescape. It's the fastest grown submerged plant I've ever kept in the hobby by far, and depending on the nutrients and light in your tank it can need trimming every single week. I am probably going to remove it from this tank this coming weekend, and I'm going to increase the water frequency and water change amount to try and counter the algae that way because I just love these big wide leaves of all the Echinodorus species and I want more space for them. Being a stem plant, this thing will just keep growing unless you trim it, so provided there's nutrients and light in the tank, it's just going to get longer and longer and longer. Due to that rapid growth rate, it's an excellent plant for natural water purification, helping to keep your fish safe. Next up is Echinodorus Tropica, and I know I mention this plant a lot. I think I have it in half of my tanks right now, but because I am on the nano tank side of the hobby, this is one of the best nano tank plants out there because of its size. To my understanding, this is a man-made cultivar, which is a smaller version of the Amazon sword Echinodorus Bleheri plant I mentioned earlier, but this one maxes out at around 10 centimeters or 4 inches. So in a 40-gallon tank, you're usually going to be using it as a foreground plant or a detailing plant like I have in this one. The main reason I actually placed mine here in this specific tank is to hide a little cave in the hardscape where my Siamese algae eater and Corydoras kept trying to get into it to steal the food that my shrimp took in there, and I was scared they'd get stuck. But I literally have this plant in half of my tanks, or very close to half of my tanks now. It's always been a very easy plant to keep in my aquariums, and it's very beginner friendly. Next up is hornwort, which is a free floating stem plant that you simply drop into your tank and leave it to do its thing. Like Limnophilus flora, I didn't plan on putting this one in here. I added it because I wanted to use something to try and soak up that excess nutrients to get the algae under control. So, like the Limnophila, this coming weekend the hornwort is probably being pulled out of here too, just because I'm going to switch to using frequent large water changes to manage the excess nutrients. Now there are over 200 varieties of hornwort in the hobby, but most of the ones you'll find in the hobby are from the hardier, easier to keep varieties, keeping it very beginner friendly. I do think that this is one of the best plants for natural water purification in the hobby because it's a free floating stem plant, so you don't need to plant it in your substrate, you literally drop it in the tank and leave it to do its thing. On top of that, because it is a stem plant, it's easy to just grab by the fistful and remove it from your tank compared to something like duckweed, which is tiny and a pain to remove from your tank if needed. Another good thing about hornwort is that I know people growing this in hard and very hard water tanks where their carbonate hardness is very high and a lot of other plants could struggle. Next up is my Lagenandra meeboldii red, and I have 2 of these in here. Now I am new to this plant and I've had it 2 or 3 months now, so it's still growing in the tank and I'm learning a lot about it, but it is definitely growing at a faster pace in this 40-gallon tank rather than my 12-gallon tank. I guess that's just because of the higher nutrient level in this tank, giving it more nutrients to grow at a faster pace. Since I haven't actually grown this one out yet, I'm not really sure of its maximum size or if it does have the ability to turn that red colour that it's known for in a low-tech tank with moderate light intensity. But so far it does seem very beginner friendly. I haven't lost one of the plants. I have them in 2 different tanks now in very different situations and they seem hardy and easy to keep. It is supposed to max out at around 20 centimeters or 8 inches in height, so it's going to be a mid-ground plant in a 40-gallon tank, but if you want it in a smaller tank you can trim it down, or if you want it in the foreground or something like that, think of it as a different type of cryptococcine and treat it the same way. Next up is my Echinodorus red diamond, which plays a similar role to the Lagenandra meeboldii red and Echinodorus Aquartica. By that I mean it usually gets to around 20 centimeters or 8 inches in size, making it an ideal mid-ground plant for a 40-gallon tank. One of my favourite things about this plant is that it can have 3 different leaf colours all at the same time, with the newer smaller leaves usually being red, and then as they grow they'll turn to brown, and then the adult leaves are green. Now there's not much red on it right now because of the way it's being grown, and I did have the Java fern lapping over it restricting light, so I have fixed that, but you can see some red on the plant. I have seen plant nurseries say this is a medium category plant, and I do think that's mainly due to light intensity, so if you are going for low lights it might not do as well, but if you're running a moderate light intensity setup like this, it's been very easy to keep. Next up is my Anubias Barteri, and while this plant can also get absolutely massive if you just leave it to do its thing, this one is tucked away on the opposite side of the filter, so it's getting very little water flow pushing nutrients to it, and on top of that my Java fern commonly blocks out light. Because of that, my Anubias nana and Anubias coinleaf that I mentioned earlier, and to some extent my Anubias Glabra, have actually grown at a far faster pace than this. but you can put it in a more prominent position in your 40-gallon tank because this thing really can get huge. Again, being Anubias, it's an epiphyte plant, so it's going to be mounted to rocks or driftwood with glue or thread rather than planted in the substrate. Now, I've seen people in the hobby jokingly refer to Anubias Barteri var Barteri, which is this one, as well as Anubias Barteri var Nana, which I mentioned earlier, as plastic aquarium plants that grow because they are so hardy and easy to keep, making them very beginner friendly. Finally, we have Echinodorus Ozelot Red Flamed, and I did intentionally leave this one until the end because I honestly don't know what to expect from it yet. Like most Echinodorus Ozelot varieties, this is a man-made cultivar, and a lot of them have very similar names, so it's very difficult to find out exactly what's going to happen to the plant. But this should be another mid-ground plant getting around 20 centimeters, so similar to the Echinodorus Aquartica, but this one is more difficult to find. And personally, I don't think I would get this again if I had the choice. It's just such a slow grow, and I'm not a big fan of plants where they're not well documented, if I'm honest. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. I know that my specific tank is Anubias and Echinodorus heavy, but I just like those plants, and if you are new to the planted tank side of the hobby, both genuses are usually very reliable and beginner friendly anyway. So thanks for watching, I hope it's been helpful, and good luck planting your 40-gallon tank.